Yo, what up guys, it's Flark again, and Blizzard made a few changes to corruptions in that they nerfed verse percent by 33% in PvP combat. So obviously I've been getting a massive amount of questions. What are we going to run? Would we change anything? Would we stick with first percent? Does this change itemization at all? Does this change essences we run? What are you doing? And the short answer is yes, changes all of those things. The long answer is this entire video. So I will essentially redo my final iteration of the itemization guides for BFA, and we'll see if this is truly final or if this is going to be a weekly occurrence. So obviously I hope it is the former, but we'll have one for Unholy this video and one for Frost as well if you want to go check that out, and I'll release them at the same time. So you should have all the information you need for both specs in two separate videos. Timestamps, of course, going to be down below, and any other questions should be answered in this video with the description, or you can feel free to ask a comment or come to my stream each night and try and get some clarification if there's anything that I missed. So without further ado, let's go back over the itemization guides. We're going to go from stats and stat weights to traits, then essences, then of course corruptions, and some miscellaneous info as a result of all the craziness, just like we did in the other videos, and hopefully these stand the test of time. But you know, I don't program the game, so I have no idea how long these videos are going to last, but preferably these will be the source of information for itemization until the end of BFA. So let's get right into it with stats. So we've gone through a lot of iterations here, and for both Unholy and Frost, but for Unholy there's been a lot of talk between verse and between haste. There's a little bit around crit and what does mastery do, and it's resulted about the same answer every single time. Haste and verse are king. Crit is okay because the necrotic strike healing absorption can crit, which nothing else can affect the actual amount of the healing absorption from necrotic strike except for critting. You can use bursting swords, the talent, but that's not a stat, it's just a talent. Versatility doesn't do it, strength doesn't do it, pretty much nothing does it. So crit actually has some merit there. Mastery, on the other hand, does very little. It increases no aspect of your burst nowadays, because the necrotic strike healing absorption is not affected, the pet damage is not affected, the autos are not affected, bursting swords is not affected, even though it is shadow damage. You know, Gatikus isn't affected. So we are finally given some concrete information that has persisted throughout the entire expansion, and that's haste and verse are king. The only thing that ever changes is which one I feel is the most king, and now that verse percent has been nerfed, there's going to be a little bit of a spoiler warning to the end of this video, but we are moving back in the direction of haste. It was very, very close, I believe, even before verse percent was nerfed, because haste increases your necrotic strike global output, and verse does really nothing of the sort. Obviously, it does not increase that pressure, and so much single target pressure comes from necrotic strike that haste had an enormous amount of value. So what does all that mean? Very simple. It didn't sound simple, but it is. Get haste and verse on every single piece of gear still, so nothing has changed there. Verse wasn't nerfed as a stat, only the verse corruption was nerfed. So haste verse with the socket, haste verse with the socket, haste verse with the socket. These are from the blacksmithing. We talked about that in the last video. You've got the jewel crafting ring. You've got the gloves from the auction house. You've got the bracers you can get from visions. You've got all sorts of ways. This is Mythic Plus. You can find more gear in Mythic Plus. Haste and verse on every piece of gear. Those two stats are king. and they will be king regardless of what changes with corruptions. So that's beautiful. Then something we didn't talk about a lot, simply because I didn't have one, but now I do. This thing is absurd. It is truly insane how good Gatiku's is. It actually procs more with your haste, and you're going to be having a lot of that. Again, spoiler warning. But that's really, really powerful because it scales with your versatility. It does obscene damage in PvP. It sustains pressure. It ignores armor. When it procs, it's just adding so much to your burst window. It kind of creates burst windows on its own. Just for a few stats being thrown out the window, it does way more than stats do. And I think we all know that by now, but just since this is the itemization part of the guide, as a final note leading into Shadowlands, this was the best weapon the entire expansion. It just was. It was the best weapon. I don't think anything else made that much of an impact on your damage in PvP as Gatiku's did. So if you're still looking for one, get your hands on it. Just like I did. Put a socket on it, put a corruption on it. You know it's going to be BIS, so feel free to do those things. So that was kind of all obvious, maybe even repeat information. I know that. So what can we add to that? Well, trinkets are always something of question. When I had verse percent gear, I used these verse trinkets here, and I still have them on now with haste gems in them, because I don't believe you want to dip to the point of true glass cannon. We went from 40% verse, and now I'm at 18%. That is a huge drop. Taking off this badge and insignia, for me, drops that even further, especially since, like I said, Gatiku doesn't have stats. And verse does increase Gatiku's damage and increases your survivability, but also they go hand in hand. Haste and verse coupled together to make survivability. If versatility increases your healing done, and haste increases the amount of globals, the rune generation, and the runic power generation that you have, then you're getting more death strikes in, and they heal for more. They're a perfect tandem. So having a baseline amount of verse is still very, very valuable. That said, as we know, there are other trinkets, remote guidance device and humming black dragon scale, that have an enormous amount of value. Right now, I am not going to run them to keep my versatility high, but this is where things get a little less set in stone, because the wheel or Drestigath can create absurd burst windows, and humming black dragon scale has extreme uptime and gives you haste, which scales with your haste percent, which we'll get to soon. So many spoilers, I know. But those trinkets are extremely powerful. The only reason I'm not personally running them is because of this. That's what happens. So that is a very, very low amount of versatility. A 6% wall, 12% extra healing, that is really starting to cut it close, especially knowing how well it synergizes with haste. So I felt, a lot of people ask me, hey, Flark, what is the minimum verse you should run? When is the minimum haste you should run? And I generally don't have an answer because there isn't one. That is not something you can just sim and tell you. But for me, I feel like dipping below that 15% mark makes you just a little bit too squishy. And the tandem value that haste and verse have together is extremely important. So yes, another huge conversation about stat weights, even though we've been talking about it the entire expansion, but those are the kind of questions I get. Like, sure, we know haste is good, we know verse is good, but what about the trinkets? What about this? This has haste and that has verse. Which one are you going to use? You're prioritizing haste in other places, and there's all those questions that can arise. So yes, I am prioritizing haste, but I use these very powerful trinkets that have been very good sustain from giving you primary stats on use and on a frequent proc that lasts a long time, and I'll use that to shore up my versatility while still getting the haste that I need from gems and enchants. So what can we take away? If your verse is high enough and you feel like survivability is not an issue in the comp that you play and the games that you've had with the healer that you play with, the trinket choices that are good in BFA Season 4 are Badge, Insignia, Wheel, Drestigath, Dragon Scale, Vita. And if anybody somehow doesn't know that iconic trinket by now, it's the one with just obscene amounts of haste from this boy, Lightning Boy. That. So yes, of course that's good. Of course that's good. When you have haste percent on so many pieces, of course that's good. Unfortunately, I don't raid ever. I haven't really stepped into that place, so I don't have it. But that is another option. So you, as a player now, knowing this information, will check, okay, what's my verse at in my optimal gear? Do you have a ring that has a little bit more versatility on it and not this one? And you have something more like that? Then maybe you look to grab that Drestigath that you got from a mythic raid, or that mythic dragon scale that you got from doing one of those first 3 runs, or even the Vita charge that you have. And you play it based on how your healer is performing, how your games are going, and how your personal survivability feels, and how your stat template looks with your BIS gear. But you're looking for haste and verse on every piece, haste gem in every piece, haste enchants on your rings, and a Gatikus. And those trinkets are your options. So yes, we've talked about stat weights 100 times on this channel, but hopefully that is the most thorough and complete with all the most powerful gear that I can give you. And the reason I spent a little bit longer on that this time around is because everything else is going to be extremely short. In fact, the only reason I even left traits in is to literally make a joke, because the traits are, as the last video said, Magus, Festermite, Heart of Darkness. Nothing's changed. They're all BIS. Find the combination of those on the highest item level pieces you have. God forbid you have this thing from this bad boy. Yeah. If you have that, you should run it. It's Magus, and it's Heart of Darkness, and it's 490. And it's Elemental Whirl, and it's Runic Barrier. That's really great. And of course, as always, get exactly 1 Runic trait, or Barrier trait, so you can have the longer AMS. They don't stack that duration. Their trait's done. So it's almost comical to even include that in, of course. But just in case anybody was curious, if any trait things have changed as a result of these nerfs, no. Of course they're still that good. So now we'll move into essences. Essences also didn't change from my last video, so I'll do a quick once-over. The only thing that did change is the value of Essence of the Focusing Iris Minor, which has gone way up. When you're using haste percent, the minor that gives you haste is better. When you're using verse percent, the minor that gives you verse is better. I know. Unfathomable information. You heard it here first. But yes, obviously the secondary stat that you're going to be stacking is going to influence what minor essence you use. And when you're stacking haste, this is the best essence source of any secondary stat, so it's also the haste one, so you're going to be using it. So you'll always have the Essence of the Focusing Iris Minor, Conflict and Strife Minor, and Breath of the Dying Minor. So you can change out the majors based on your playstyle, but it seems like still the only ones that could ever see any play, Breath of the Dying is nerfed now. When you kill a pet, it doesn't get the proc, thank the Lord. But that still does a lot of sustained damage, so you can throw in Blood of the Enemy Major for Obscene Burst, Breath of the Dying Major for very sustained pressure and execute potential, and of course then you can throw in another minor, which I would always generally say something like Lucid Dreams, which is just generally good for Unholy and still gives you that verse and still gives you the rune generation, so it's just good. Or you could use Condensed Life Force, and you'd have to put Breath back in. This is a very high sustained burst window, while also giving you 10% haste, which is just obviously good. Conflict and Strife, and then of course you would go back to that Lucid Dreams minor. See how the process goes? You grab a major, it empties a slot of those 3 guaranteed minors, Focusing Iris, Strife, and Breath of the Dying, and you fill it in with Lucid Dreams, and that's how you create a concoction of essences. This is when you need Zone, pretty much. Because as you can see, it fills up that, or it frees up that PvP spot, so you can do something like this, you can do something like that, you can do something like this, if you need Lichborn, if you really need survivability. We've talked PvP talents. The old video on that is still extremely valuable, so we've talked about the PvP talents and their value extensively, and nothing has changed since. All of that information is still good from my other videos, so feel free to check that out, of course, on my channel, the compendium of PvP Unholy DK information. But anyway, that's when you need a zone. You're going to essentially do Conflict and Strife Major. And of course, Vision of Perfection is one of the highest single target sustain, if not the highest single target sustain. So you can throw that in, and of course, then you would have to go back to this. Remember, this is the staple 3 minors you must have at all times. The only way you can change out another minor, right, is if you put one of those in as a major, because then you get the minor effect. So you put in Conflict Major, now you still have the minor effect, you still have that trifecta of valuable minors, and you can put in your Lucid Dreams, and you've got your complete essences in. So we talked about that a lot in the last video. It remains very, very similar, just some touch-up information to clarify for the people who hadn't seen it, since that is an outdated video now. And of course, the big change is Essence of the Focusing Iris gives you haste, which is amplified by your final spoiler, haste percent corruptions, which of course we're going to get to now, but it's all spoiled at this point. But the haste given by this is amplified by that amp corruption, and you get more of it. And getting more of a stat from the general budget of an essence is just overall good. Plus Focusing Iris was good already. So, we've kind of plowed through this as we've had these talks a lot in the past. You know, I'm hoping that people are starting to follow my train of thought and my thinking and my logic behind this stuff. And now we're just creating a shore up video that will just reinforce those things we've talked about the entire expansion long and give us one final build to create going into the end of the season and your last season push and your Shadowlands pre-patch and all that good stuff. But finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, not really anymore because we know what it's going to be, is corruptions. But the balance between these two is still interesting. So the 2 corruptions that I think every top end Unholy DK is playing around with is Gushing Wound, oozing blood here, the very infamous corruption, and haste percent, which gives you your best stat now. Now the verse percent is in fact nerfed. It's only 8% in PvP, but haste percent is still 12, and they were so close. When you literally lower the amount you gain from all sources by 4%, there is no way that haste percent isn't better, especially with haste percent synergy with Gushing Wound. Gushing Wound gets more procs the more haste you have. So just like haste and verse synergize well together in your stat weights, haste and Gushing Wound, or haste percent and Gushing Wound corruptions, synergize extremely well together in this section. And that is why a combination of both is extremely powerful. Not only do you get more value out of your overwhelming power traits, out of your necklace haste, out of all the haste on your gear with gems and enchants, out of your Vita if you're using it, or your Dragon Scale if you're using it, your Focusing Iris, you're getting more out of that. You're also now proccing your Gushing Wound more often. Gushing Wound is one of those things that increases your sustained damage by so much because it procs so much in a PvP environment that even when you have low uptime or you're out of runes or you're using your runic power defensively instead of aggressively, it's still always doing damage. It's always doing damage. And the reason for this corruption's obscene power is just like Katiku's. It just comes and does damage. You don't have to be on the target once it procs. You don't have to be near the target. It just starts doing damage. It adds burst windows, it adds sustained pressure, and Gushing is crazy because it will proc off your disease application, your disease's ticks. It will proc off of anything, and it will proc at a range, it will proc when you're CC'd, and it will just keep adding that effect, that corruption, to your target, and increase that sustained pressure immensely. So once you get back on your target, you're already doing damage from Gushing, and now you still have a Gushing on them, so you're stacking up Necros while you've already applied damage to them, and it's just a constant source of sustained pressure, which Unholy loves, because you have that already from Necrotic Strike healing absorption, from your pets, from your Maguses, from your single target burst that Unholy excels so well in, from your Gatikus. It synergizes with that perfectly, it synergizes with haste perfectly, and haste gives your Gatikus and your Gushing Wound more procs. Right? That is a lot of synergy, and no kidding, this build really fits well in together. I mean, really, the build is just get a lot of haste, get a lot of verse, Gushing, Gatikus, haste percent, you're done. But I do like explaining, hey, this is why all of this matters, because I believe that that allows you to use your own gear to create a perfect synergistic build as well. Because remember, you might not have access to all the same exact pieces that I do. And the trinket discussion is a big one. And hopefully this gives you the information you need now to make those trinket decisions, because I can't look at each and every viewer's piece of gear and construct a perfect setup for them. And it is true that despite this being simple, like, hey, get a lot of haste and verse, there's still decisions you're going to have to make. So, the final question on everybody's mind is how much haste percent and how much gushing? My mix so far that I've felt to do the most single target pressure, the most output, is 4 gushing and 3 haste percent, which is what I can run at my current corruption. The next thing I'm going to add for all the people who have been doing the corruption resistance each week, which I had not been doing on this Unholy DK, awkward, is haste percent. So then I will have 4 and 4. So all you guys with a higher corruption resistance total than I do, throw on 1 more haste percent. I think that will be obscene. It will put you over 52% haste. Actually more than that, maybe 55% haste, which is going to make this bad boy proc more and these bad boys proc more, and then add so much pressure from your Magus and your pet autos and your necrotic strikes. So I think the perfect amount for all the people who are dumb like me and have a low corruption resistance, do 3 haste percent and 4 gushing wound. Then when you add another, do 4 and 4. Then, if we're still going further in the expansion and nothing has changed and no more nerfs have come in, you can do 4 and 5. So just keep adding it like that. Then add another haste percent, then add another gushing, then add another haste percent, and keep them even like that. Not for any particular reason, as if they somehow do more damage when they're even, but I feel like that gives you the best bang for your buck from all the stats that you're stacking. I mean, you're stacking the heck out of haste from all of these different sources. Why would you not use the corruption that gives you more from all those sources? Now, eventually, of course, you're going to reach that global cooldown cap, which actually kind of devalues haste a little bit. But that's going to be in CDs. Still getting so much pressure from extra fast global cooldowns when you don't have those things procced is valuable. And you can see right now with my current setup, you will be looking at, let's auto attack this boy until, or well, let's press abilities until this goes up to 10. So we're looking at focused energy that comes from your focusing iris, that goes up to 10. And you have 57%, and your global cooldown is still going down. You can press Unholy Frenzy, and it's still going down. And of course, you can look for procs, and it'll still be going down. So you can get it very close. It goes down to 0.75. You need 100% haste, which I just proc to with overwhelming power, and that will get it there. But you can see you're certainly not constantly at the global cooldown cap. So that is not something you're running into. Like, whoops, I'm at 150% haste permanently. And of course, overwhelming power again, nerfed by half in PvP, like all traits. So it doesn't shoot you up as much in PvP. So you have room to add, maybe I think to about 55%, 56, 58% base haste. And once you hit that point, maybe you can say, okay, I'm never going to get any more value out of the GCD now with me constantly rolling around 80, 85% in PvP combat, and then every time I press any button or get any impactful proc, I go way over that 100%. Everything else then would go into gushing. So for now, when we're not at that point, you can have a 3 haste, 4 gushing corruption split, then a 4 haste, 4 gushing corruption split, then a 4 haste, 5 gushing corruption split. And if you hit that haste point that I just talked about, get a 6 gushing. And that is going to give you the most obscene sustained pressure I think you could ever possibly see. I think now we are at the point with this exact setup where Unholy's single target is now as high as it gets. If Demon Hunters didn't have so much passive dodge, I think you would be unbeatable in 2v2 combat. And of course, Unholy is still extremely good in 3s, though there might be a few specs a little more oppressive. But that essentially combined with your single target burst window is giving you an enormous amount, as we know. Necrotic strikes on the target in that window, obscene single target pressure, and you have so fast globals that you never press Festering Strike, just like always. You are just constantly, you see the only button I'm pressing is Necrotic Strike, constantly generating wounds and spending them with Necrotic Strike without using your generator, allowing for such obscene single target damage while stacking up so many necrotics and not wasting your runes or your global cooldowns on Festering. And that is the build. Look at that beauty. That is the build. And that is how you create yet another obscene build until they nerf this too. I don't know what they'll nerf next. Haste percent, Gushing Wound again. Maybe they just take corruptions out of Arena. Maybe they just close the game and say, just wait till Shadowlands. We don't know what the hell we're supposed to do. I'm not sure. I don't program the game. But that is our next and hopefully final iteration of the super powered Unholy build. There you go. So the last brief recap. Haste and Verse, Haste and Gushing Split, Gatiku's is obscene. We know the trinkets, the Insignia, Badge, Vita, Dragon Scale, Guidance Device, Drestigath. Find some combination of the best, highest item level ones with sockets that you can find, and keep your verse at that point that works for you and your healer and your comp and the way that you play. Only you know all those things, and only you know the gear that you have in your bags right now. So with this information, sure, it was a longer video than it needed to be if I was conveying, I think, 6 facts in total, he says, holding up 7 fingers. But the value in that should be you can now use what you have available to create your own BIS setup. And that's what I wanted to do. So rambling over, there is one more thing, though, that I wanted to talk about, and that is called miscellaneous information. There are some big questions that I get all the time, right here on this screen. Hey Flark, what's the difference between All Will Serve and Infected Claws? What's the difference between Bursting Swords and Even Fever? And why the heck are you running Pestilent instead of Soul Reaper? Let me go through each and every one of those questions right now for you. So this is the miscellaneous section. Welcome. Starting at the top, All Will Serve adds very small, but piles on, especially with all the haste that we have, sustained damage for free. It's completely passive, it doesn't cost anything. Infected Claws adds an enormous amount of pressure in burst windows if you're not wound capped already. So, unfortunately, during your A-Bomb Unholy Frenzy window, you kind of are in PvP. So if you have enough haste and your auto attacks from both your A-Bomb and yourself with Unholy Frenzy are applying wounds faster than you can spend them, Infected Claws essentially loses that value in every burst window, and you're going to swap over to All Will Serve. The other thing Infected Claws does, which is really cool, is it resets the duration of infected wounds, as we've talked about many times, of your wounds on the target. So if it resets the duration, then if you have a 5 stack and he applies one and resets it, now you have a 6 stack, but also you didn't lose your 5 stack if you're getting rooted, polyed, feared, coiled, stunned, kidneyed, you know? So that is another thing. How much uptime are you receiving against the comp that you're playing against? What is your uptime? If you have low uptime or low haste, run Claws. If you have high haste and good uptime, run All Will Serve, because it just adds more passive damage, while this one might just overcap your wounds. Question 1 answered. Bursting Swords versus Even Fever. Even Fever is more damage, because Bursting Swords, the damage that it does, is literally only to the off targets, i.e. the target you're not bursting a wound on. The value of Bursting Swords comes into the fact that 25% more also applies to Necrotic Strike healing absorption, which is great because it makes that amount at the bottom right corner of my screen there go from 4% to 5% of a target's health. That is extremely impactful when you have a lot of haste because you're spamming more necros, which means you're getting more value out of them. Again, when you have lower haste, Even Fever tends to see a lot more value. But there's another reason people are using Even Fever, and it's when they're rocking a lot of Gushing Wounds, because it does 15% more damage over time in half the duration. That means it procs twice as much or twice as fast, rather. And if it's proccing twice as fast, it's actually increasing the amount of gushing wounds you can apply to a target. That is the rationale that I've heard a couple of high-end PvP DKs making. Personally, I haven't actually tested if each individual tick, but I would believe it because of what I've seen gushing proc from. So if you have low haste or a heckload of gushings on your gear and that's just what you have access to, I've seen even Fever see a lot of value. But the real difference is if you don't have enough haste to get all the necros that are required for bursting sores, then you're going to run even Fever. So there's another debate talent answered. Here is the biggest one, and this is the question I get asked the most about pretty much more than anything. Every time I show talents on stream, they're like, why the heck are you using this crap? And that's because I play very aggressively to win games in burst windows. I commit to my win condition of killing somebody in a stun in a burst window. And if you're spamming necrotic, you just saw me do my burst window on the stationary dummy. Hopefully the hodged healer kind of acts like a stationary dummy because he's stunned. If I'm only spamming necrotic strike every global, what did I press, like 35 in that amount of time? 18. Okay, it felt like a lot more. 18 consecutive necrotic strikes without using a single generator. That is a lot. It was, what did we say? It was like 450k healing absorption plus the 130k DPS, which does not translate to PvP, we know that. But enormous amount of damage without using any generators or running out of runes, and I still didn't run out of runes even when I walked away from the dummy. That means I don't need to use anything, specifically a global cooldown that generates runes. Now it does some damage, but Necrotic Strike does more. So there's literally no reason, if that is the win condition that I'm committing to use something that generates rune. At no point during that entire burst window did I ever stop pressing my damaging abilities that I wanted to press. So why would I need to press this one to give me runes that I didn't ever run out of? So using Pestilent with that much haste, committing that hard to a burst window, just essentially gives you your rune generation without requiring the global. Is that some incredible thing that is going to completely win you games? No. No, it's not going to do that. It's just the most minor of changes in which the difference between them is under 1%, but I simply don't need to press Soul Reaper in those windows that I'm trying to win the game. So I'm saving myself exactly one global, as well as giving me a lot of generation outside of that, which then keeps those necrotics coming throughout the entire window. And that's it. Those are those three talents that I always get questions about. We'll call that the miscellaneous section. It's this line, and of course Soul Reaper and Pestilent. And those are my answers for each one. They're about as concrete as I can make them. You cannot sim PvP, so I don't think there's going to be too many better answers than that. But those are my rationale points on those three debate talents, so to speak. And that, my friends, is attempt number 2 at the itemization guide until the end of BFA. Currently, it's absurd output, and you will have a blast with that fast global cooldowns, that much pressure from every source, that much damage coming from your gushing and your Gatikus. So enjoy it until Blizzard takes it away, and Godspeed, gentlemen. Until next time, good luck.